Hello, I'm from Ukraine. In this video I will tell you how Russian propaganda works. You will understand how in 21st century you can turn the population of such a huge country into real Nazis who support the war, support the genocide of the Ukrainian people and dream of destroying the entire Western world. Let's start from the history. The traditions of Russian propaganda, hatred for Ukraine and the West began in the time of the Tsars, and it was several centuries ago. But now we won't go so deep, but we will start from the 20th century. There was a single anti-Western ideology in the USSR and in all countries that were under its influence. Absolutely all the media, teachers at schools and universities, artists in their works inspired the idea that the United States and the entire Western world are the world evil. People were told that in the West there was wrong and lagging science, that the inhabitants of the West are unspiritual and depraved, that they were all materialistic and had no other values than power and enrichment. I'm a clinical psychologist and I have lots of Soviet books on psychotherapy. Almost every book has a section with criticize Western therapy. That shows that even professional literature had to include propaganda. As a result, propaganda didn't just somehow influence on the Russians. It has formed the thinking and worldview of many generations of the Russians. Putin's propaganda doesn't almost create any new myths, but continues the traditions of Soviet propaganda. But people want to believe in it. They have a request for such information because it fully corresponds to their beliefs and worldview. Putin began harassing opposition journalists and closing down opposition media as soon as he came to power in 1999. Only 8 years had passed since the collapse of the USSR. That means that in Russia even a single generation didn't grow up not being under influence of anti-Western propaganda. Nowadays, most Russians believe that people in the West are greedy, they only think about money. In Russia, people from the LGBT community are considered vicious and sinful mistakes of nature. So the West, according to the Russians, is going to hell because it defends the rights of the LGBT community. Also in Russia there is a well-established stereotype that America has very poor education and all Americans are stupid, that they are absolutely devoid of creativity. Russia is always opposed to the West because another important myth is that Russian culture is the greatest culture on the planet. Most Russians believe that true spirituality and true religion exist only in Russia. Only Russian culture is capable of producing truly great people. The best thinkers, scientists, philosophers are Russians. And if American science has any success, it's only thanks to immigrants from Russia. Due to such myths, racism, chauvinism and xenophobia are very strong in Russia. Let's talk now about their attitude towards the Ukrainians. You remember Kletus, a character from The Simpsons. If you watch Russian cinema of any period, the Ukrainians there almost always look like Kletus. A Ukrainian is a good-natured, stupid, naive, uneducated and funny redneck, when a Russian is always a wise, loving but strict older brother, always ready to help stupid Ukrainians. Soviet propaganda coined the term fraternal peoples for the Russians and Ukrainians. Russian propaganda still uses it today calling us brothers, and Russia is always called as the older brother and Ukraine as the younger one. And of course, the younger brother is stupid and inexperienced, and that is why the older brother should interfere in his affairs and tell him how best to act. In fact, a Ukrainian is a Russian, only spoiled and stupid. That's how propaganda presents any aggression towards Ukraine as concern for the Ukrainians, who can harm themselves if Russia doesn't intervene. Another important aspect of Russian propaganda is the speculation on the topic of Nazism. The Second World War was a real tragedy for the inhabitants of the USSR. In this war, 26 million citizens of the Soviet Union died, and the memory of this tragedy was passed down from generation to generation. This is why in Russia the best way to demonize a person or even an entire country is to call them Nazis and Fascists. This strategy also wasn't invented by Putin. Soviet propaganda used it in relation to the countries of Eastern Europe, where the struggle for independence began in the late 80s of the last century. For the last 8 years, all Russian propaganda, the entire political elite of Russia and Putin personally had been talking about the fact that Nazism was established in Ukraine after the revolution in 2014. That the Nazis rule the country and neo-Nazi youth movements are created in our country all the time, and the Nazi ideology is imposed on children at schools. And we have the last piece of our Russian propaganda puzzle. As I already said, in Russia they believe that the Russians and the Ukrainians are fraternal peoples, and Ukraine, as part of the USSR, made a huge contribution to the victory in the Second World War and suffered from enormous losses. That is why it's necessary to explain to the Russians how the Ukrainians could allow Nazism to exist in their country. And the answer is very simple. The terrible West, and first of all America, created the Nazi regime in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians couldn't resist this because they are stupid and underdeveloped. It turns out that the West is seizing Ukraine and creating Nazi power there in order to get close to the borders of Russia, because it wants to destroy it. I have been talking about in this video. And the Ukrainians are actually normal Russian people, but stupid, and that is why the Americans brainwashed them. Because of this, Russia has now come to liberate Ukraine from Nazism and enslavement by the Americans. And in fact, the war in Ukraine is a war that United States unleashed against Russia. I hope you don't get confused. This is the picture of the world in which the majority of Russians live. The main goal of my channel is to bring the truth to you and protect you from a big war. The cause of the war in Ukraine is not Putin. The reason is this distorted picture of the world. All sociological studies show that the vast majority of Russians support this war. And many Russians who don't support the war, they simply don't agree with such radical methods, but they still support the idea of fighting with the West and restoring the Russian Empire. The only way to save Europe is to defeat the Russian army and isolate the Russian economy. And only Russia's renunciation of nuclear weapons can be considered as a victory. And as long as Russians believe in confrontation with the West, in the greatness of their culture and in their great mission to save spirituality on our planet, no one in the world can feel safe. Thank you for watching this video. Like, ask questions in the comments and subscribe. I will continue to talk about Russia and about life in Ukraine during the war.